Hello, it's Jim Marshall here with the Real Estate Insider podcast. This is the fourth episode of the podcast, and today I have a old friend of mine. We've known each other for a long, long time. Heather Baer, formerly of Cottage Link Rental Management, and probably Canada's foremost expert on cottage and short-term rentals. Welcome to the podcast, Heather.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Jim.
Yeah, well, we're talking before the podcast. We used to do the Cottage Life show together. That's how we I've got to know each other going back 20 years or more. Probably before I started with Remax.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, I remember it all well. You know, the Cottage Life show every year and going up and down the real estate aisles. Schmoozing, that's what we used to do, and I'm sure you did it too.
Oh, I used to take off, we used to break it down to shifts, so you have 4 shifts a day. I'd have shift 1 and 3, and then 2, I'd go off schmoozing. I talk to people. Oh yeah, you talk to contractors, talk to other realtors, you compare war stories, and it was more, I used to get more of those shows, I think, more out of it personally than people that attended them.
Oh yeah, so the networking as a vendor was the best. It really was. And I'm not sure I ever wanted to be an attendee because those aisles got pretty jammed up on a Saturday afternoon.
If you're a claustrophobe, it wasn't certainly the place to be. But those shows, like, it's interesting. I was just talking to somebody in our office that was at the home show this week in Toronto, and they said compared to what it used to be, it was a fraction of the size. So, and we heard the same thing about the boat show in January. So I'm not sure if those consumer shows will come back post-COVID or not. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting how things have changed since COVID.
Lots has changed since COVID. Yeah, like we were talking about ChatGPT before we started recording and how we're both using it in our businesses. Like this is just, who would have imagined this 6 months ago?
It's phenomenal. It's really phenomenal. The pace of change now in technology, and you've got to be in it, because if you're not in it now, you're going to lose out because things are just moving way too fast. So I'm trying to keep up, with everything.
So do I, and we're both nerds, tech nerds, and we like this stuff. But I've been seeing a lot of infographics on the internet talking about these graphs showing the adoption of how long it took Instagram to get to 1 million people on Facebook, and then they're kind of going up. And when you look at ChatGPT, it's a rocket ship, straight line going up. It went to 0 to 100 people, 1 million users in something like 8 days or something. It's insane how quickly this stuff is moving.
Well, I was watching the guy from ChatGPT announcing ChatGPT 4 yesterday. And, within 20 hours, he'd had 1.8 million views of this 20-minute talk.
Yeah, and it's not that it's replacing your job, my job. It's a tool. It's a research tool. It's all it is.
Well, yeah, and we're going to be talking about cottage rental and cottage rental owners and how they can get out and market their properties. And this is a tool that every cottage rental owner needs to have in their arsenal now, because it's going to be part of the business going forward.
So how do you see it, like, post-COVID? Is it harder for people looking for a cottage to rent? Is it tougher to find cottages now than it was, say, 2019?
Well, the way I saw it, that COVID came just at the right time. If it was going to come at any time at all, it came just at the right time. We got shut down in 2020. We were shut down in 21. We didn't like it, but it was in the low season, and it allowed those professional operators to really look at their processes and how everything worked and their emergency planning. So I think if anything that came out of it, it taught us that we need to have more emergency planning in place in case something like this happens again. But I'm not sure, COVID has had that much impact, apart from, and as you will know in the real estate business, the craziness of the market, with people wanting to buy properties and paying whatever was being asked. And way more than that. And I remember going out to see a property with an owner in November 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And it was he was a new owner. It was the first time he'd seen the property. He bought it sight unseen. And it was a 6-bedroom. I mean, he paid a lot over asking for this property. And I have to say, it was quite good being with him as he saw it, because it was very positive. It was a beautiful place, and I think he made a very wise move. But what will happen if any of these people who paid over the odds for their properties back in 2020 and 2021, if they need to sell? And the other thing that did happen was a lot of people moved out to their properties because they could work from home, so they weren't being rented. We had a lot of our inventory taken off because the owners moved back into them. Now, of course, everybody's going back to the city. They're going back to work, and that has put a big strain on the demand, the supply side of the rental business, not in a good way. It's saturated.
Okay, so I had somebody ask me the other day, and I sent them actually off to Cottage Lake, because it's always the site that I send people to. So they had friends coming up from the US this summer, and I gave them the standard answer: you better start looking now, because things tend to book up. So there are properties available for people if they're looking to rent this summer.
Well, I have been out of it now for 9 months, having sold the company last year. But from what I see on Facebook groups and forums, is that the supply is still high, and demand is not as good as, or is not at the rate it would normally be at this time of year in March. In March, we would usually expect that the majority of our properties would have been full throughout the summer, and there's still gaps. And I'm seeing people, with independent owners saying, I've still got 5 weeks, 6 weeks of the summer. But the other thing is that the pandemic caused a lot of, I don't like to say price gouging, but I think it was happening in certain areas, and people were just raising the prices so high because the demand was massive during those 2 years. And a lot of owners have had to become very realistic now and realize that those high prices aren't going to cut it in today's market. So it's going to become much more competitive for this summer for the ordinary 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom cottage to get filled without a lot of additional marketing.
That's interesting, because one of the things we're seeing here in the Parry Sound area and in other areas of cottage country are municipalities, and we'll speak about this in a bit, that are starting to prohibit any short-term rentals within the municipal boundaries. We've got Seguin Township. They actually just had a meeting earlier this week. Staff recommended that they bring a licensing program in. The council said, nope, we're going to stick with what we have. We have and the way they look at it's like Harding Township as well, and they've had it for years. Mm-hmm. It's a commercial use in a residential zoning, and that's precluded in the comprehensive zoning bylaws, and they say it's an illegal use. So we've seen a lot of those cottages. In Seguin, the last couple of years, we've had a couple clients of ours sell because they couldn't rent them anymore. McDougall Township, we just sold a cottage up there. I had to put right in the comments that there's no short-term rentals in this, because half the calls we're still getting from people saying how much Airbnb has become a, it's like Band-Aid. It's become a vernacular verb. How much can Airbnb it for? And it's like, you can't. Mm-hmm. And so we've seen from our end, I think, and if you go on to, I'm not a big Airbnb fan, but if you go on to Airbnb or Vibro or whatever, you'll see these gaps where there's basically nothing mm-hmm. there. So there's a lot less competition, you'd think, for these rentals because of the short-term rental rules in the municipalities.
Well, it's really hard because everywhere's got something different that they're doing. It's almost like they're in competition to, I'm going to find the most original and creative way of banning or legislating short-term rentals. Why there could not be a provincial system. Well, I do know why, because the municipalities would rail against any form of provincial guidelines on anything, I guess. But we've I was following last year what was happening in Oro-Medonte, which was just another area where they just wanted to completely ban short-term rentals. But we were working at the time. I live in Huntsville. We saw the incoming legislation in Huntsville, which is a very fair licensing system, which brings in, I would imagine, a very substantial amount of money into the township via the fee that guests pay. And they pay a fee to stay in a short-term rental, which goes to the township. And that's, owners have to comply with a number of things. They have to have an inspection. They have to make sure they're not overcrowding. Everything is done up front and in a very visible way. And even that the township has all their license rentals on their website. It just works so well. I'm sure you look at some of these bans and just cannot comprehend why they've gone that way.
We have Whitestone, which is northeast of Parry Sound and West Parry Sound still area, but they're the first ones that came out with this licensing program. And I remember reading it when they came out about 4 years ago, and went, Little Whitestone came up with this, and it was novel at the time. I think Huntsville drew some of their inspiration for the way that they handled it from what Whitestone was doing. And I'd have some of the municipalities, some of the councillors I know, they call me up and they say, "What do you think?" And I said, "Follow what Whitestone's doing. I think this is the way to do it." But they don't, and they kind of go off on their own. And there's other. I think the lake associations, or I know the lake associations, have a huge influence over some of the municipal people. I don't think any of the lake associations are pro short-term rentals. So we just had an election here back in the fall, and that was a massive issue, especially in the rural municipalities.
Yeah, and it's a great shame. And I think you mentioned Airbnb. Airbnb has a lot to answer for in this area, because before, rentals have been part of the fabric of cottage country summers. From I've been in Canada since 1999, and it was going when I got here, and nobody seemed to bother because the people who rented were responsible. They talked to their we don't call them renters, we call them guests. So they talked to their guests before they booked. They made sure that there were right people for the property, and I'm sure there were probably issues here and there. But since the whole world changed and everybody wanted to do everything online without talking to anybody, those changes came in, and alongside of that, there was a lot of investment in cottage country from people who had no intention of ever living there. It was simply this is a cash cow. Let's buy this property. We'll fill it up with Airbnb renters at the lowest rate possible, so we can just keep this churning through and this revolving door going. And that has built up a them and us type of situation. So there are still, and I would like to say the majority of owners who are renting out their properties are very, very responsible. They care about their properties, and they care about their neighbors, and they care about their community. And unfortunately, these are the ones that are being penalized. And I love that expression, penalizing the 2%, penalizing the 98% for what you're afraid the 2% might do.
Yeah. Yeah, and if it's ironic that Airbnb was the start of it was I have an extra bedroom in my basement. I'll rent out the base, in the summer season. We've got a friend that rents out, I think a bedroom in their basement during the festival season and things like that. There's no issue. It's when it became business, as you said, where people were just buying cottages, and we've had people we know that have had cottages for 4 or 5 years, never slept a night in them.
Yeah.
And that's the bigger issue here. The Airbnb, and the problem is that we see with it, notwithstanding that, is the fact that people aren't being vetted when they come in, and they've got these really short, I want it for the weekend type things.
Yeah.
And when you're in the rental management business, we used to rent our cottage on Whitefish Lake. We never 2 weeks minimum. Sorry. And that doesn't happen with these online platforms.
Well, as a cottage rental agency, as we were for 20 years, it was we just felt it was responsibility. It was incumbent on us to look after not only our guests, but our owners and the communities that those properties were in, because it just didn't make sense to put people in there that might cause a disturbance. So we used to promote our business to new owners by saying we screen our guests, and anybody that comes in your property, we will have talked to, we will have discussed
Oh, you cut out there for a bit. Did you try speaking now? Oh, I can't hear you at all. Okay, hold on. We will have to cut this out and try it again. Okay, you're back.
How about that?
I'll have Cameron edit that out. That's fine. A little bit of, we had it happen last week too. It's just think it's internet. It's an issue that I still feel that the way that Huntsville and Whitestone are doing are the best ways. It's completely transparent, and we don't recommend anybody use Airbnb for cottage rentals. Now, I'm going to Europe next week. We're renting an Airbnb. It tends to work better, though, I think, we've done them in Europe. We've done them in New York City. They tend to work better there. I won't do one in Toronto ever again because it's a nightmare.
What bothers me is that that some of the insurance companies have gone, that they're now hand in hand with Airbnb, and we found that people who had wanted to rent with us said, well, we can't do that because our insurance company says you have to be on Airbnb.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
And that is, I think, I can't remember who it was, but it was a major insurer.
There was an insurer that we used years ago out of the city, and you could do something like 200 days rentals and that. So you really have to, and that's the nice thing about dealing with an agency too, as opposed to doing Airbnb. How many of these people that are on that short-term rentals, how many think you have the proper insurance?
And that is scary. Speaking as somebody who got sued by a guest who chose not to use a designated pathway to get to a property, took a shortcut walking across a lawn and tripped over, and then sued us for a slip and fall accident. If we had not been insured, if the owner had not been insured, then it would have been a nightmare scenario, because at the end it was seen as a frivolous claim, and it was settled. I don't know how the insurance company settled it, but it was all settled, and without us having to lift a finger, because we had insurance, because the owner had insurance. I cannot just imagine how anybody could go into do anything in this business without being insured, because it's going to happen one day. Somebody's going to have an accident or make a claim, and if you don't have that coverage, that peace of mind, you'll enter the nightmare scenario.
or burn your cottage down. Like that's the other thing. Like, oh, but we've had a couple big fires here in Perry Sound over the last, I don't know, 6-7 months. And, generally, electrical, wood fire,
Yep.
wood stoves, things like that. Very easy, especially if you're not really, if you're used to, a wood stove is the log you get from Loblaws. You throw it in, you light it up, and you got a flame, and you got a full fire in 5 minutes. They don't know how to use them. So,
I see so many of these situations where, there's a lot of people standing on a deck and it collapses, or somebody has, they bought a property and their little front deck is a little bit higher than it should be without a railing, but they haven't bothered putting in a railing. And then somebody's fallen off that and they've hurt themselves. And we're not quite in the sort of litigious society that they have down here in the US, but we're getting that way.
Yeah, we're definitely getting that way. So if you're a cottage owner and you live in a municipality, because the first thing you want to do is check with a municipality. You can call them, call us, we'll tell you whether you can or not, and we actually put a guide up back earlier in the winter time, kind of to navigate around the Westbury Sound municipalities. If you want one of those, to send us an email, we'll send you. And again, it's current up to about a month ago, and it's changing all the time. But assuming that you live in Whitestone, you know the process. What are the positive things about doing short-term rentals, notwithstanding the fact it's giving you some cash flow?
Oh, because I owned 6 properties at one time and rented them out, and I absolutely loved it. But I think you have to go into it with the right mindset, and that's a hospitality mindset. Going into this without understanding that once you accept money in exchange for accommodation, you have entered the travel and tourism industry, and you're a travel provider. I think if you don't have that mindset going in, then you're going to have problems, because people do damage things. They will break your stuff. They will do things that you'll shake your head at, and move furniture and do stupid things because they're people on vacation and they go into vacation brain mode. If you are not in a hospitality mindset, you won't be able to cope with that. Each week as you do a changeover, it'll become more and more stressful. So I think that's the very, very first thing. You go into this short-term rental business, put on your hospitality hat and understand you're a travel provider now.
If you don't have the mindset and the personality to be a landlord, don't do this. Like, it's just it's a certain type of personality to do it. If you're very finicky about the way your furniture is placed in your place and somebody moves it, you freak out over it. Is it worth doing?
That's right. You've got to be flexible. And you say landlord, you've got to separate out, what, long-term and short-term rental. Short-term, you're creating the dream for people who don't have the luxury of being able to enjoy the place whenever they want to. This is their 1 week or 2 weeks of the year where they're putting down a lot of money to have their dreams fulfilled. They've done a lot of planning about how amazing it's going to be, and the owner or the manager, depending on whether you do it yourself or whether you put it with a property manager, has a lot of responsibility for making sure that those dreams are met. So that everything on a listing is there as promised, and that you provide all the information so that no guest gets any surprises at all. I mean, we use a digital guidebook. It's a company called Touchstay, which is absolutely amazing. And you just fill in everything in this digital guidebook, and it gets sent out to all your guests. And it lays out what vacationing in cottage country is all about. So you're educating, and that's part of this responsibility, is educating guests so that they have a really smooth rental experience, because nothing is a surprise. You know, the things that go bump in the night. We used to tell our guests that they're going to hear, or very likely they're going to hear, a water pump kick in if somebody flushes a toilet in the middle of the night. We're going to tell them that noise carries across a lake. So please don't have your domestic at the end of the dock, because you're sharing it with the entire lake. We'll tell them that fire bans happen, so your campfire is not guaranteed. And we told them that if there's a storm, there's a good likelihood that you won't have any power. So it's about educating and creating the dream experience, because the guests know what to expect. There are no surprises.
And the biggest surprise that we find when cottage buyers come up here, they ask about animals. Are there animals here? And it's like, you're living in the bush. You're going to see everything, or you could see everything that you can imagine, short of Bigfoot. Like, you're going to see, if you want to see bears and raccoons at your back door, leave the garbage out for a couple of days. You just don't do those. It's just stuff that we take for granted because we've grown up here. But if you have rarely ventured north of Highway 7, you don't know that stuff. So you have to, you have to educate people. You can't do that. You drive around for an afternoon, you will see deer, almost guaranteed. They're everywhere.
And you're likely to see mouse droppings somewhere, even in the cleanest house. And this is something I think that's important for any new cottage owner who's planning on renting out, is to know, is that the people that are coming now are not as self-sufficient as they used to be. I remember, Jim, 20 odd years ago, people would come up for their rental week and they would rough it. They would happily rough it. If the power went out, well, who cares? We'll sit by candlelight and we'll play games and have great fun, and we won't be complaining too much if the Wi-Fi goes out. So you've got to know that people have high expectations now. So it's just getting out there in front of them and saying, look, there's mice in cottage country. We can't control these little critters. And if you leave a door open, you only got to turn your back and they'll be in. And the next thing you know, you've got mouse droppings, because we've seen the claims that have come from people who said, I saw some mouse droppings. I want all my money back.
Oh, God.
And Airbnb,
really?
if they've come through Airbnb are very likely to refund them. Wow.
That's like, when we're doing cottage showings, people leave doors open. And I always say, gotta close the door. Not only mice, you get squirrels, chipmunks. I've chased chipmunks out of people's cottages and squirrels because they get in and then they freak and then they're off God knows where. And you got to try to extricate that little creature out. Don't leave doors open up here, or windows, nothing. Because there's too many creatures up here that will get in. So you've talked a lot about the benefits of dealing with a rental agency, whether you're a buyer or seller. Is there anything you could add to that? Because I think it's extremely important for whatever side that you're on, whether you're looking to rent or you're a landowner, to use an agency.
Well, we've always had this. There's always people that have been renting independently. And I'm not going to talk about the ones who are out there just putting a listing up on Airbnb and then paying, looking for passive income. We used to say to people when they came to us and said, well, we're thinking of renting out, but we thought we'd try it for ourselves for a year. And I said, look, I think you should go the other way around. Put your property with an agency for the first year and let them handhold you. And you will see exactly what goes on. You'll deal with damage. You'll deal with complaints. You'll deal with people that lock themselves out. But you'll have the backup of the agency all the way. If after that year you feel that you can deal with every message, every complaint, every issue, every question, then by all means go out on your own and do it responsibly. But I always, we heard this so much that, oh, we'll try it ourselves for the year. And it's just so much better to do it the other way. Yes, there is some commission involved, but it's freeing you up as the owner, freeing your time that would be spent in that first year, ironing out all the little kinks that often come with a rental over a first season.
And we've all heard the horror stories of people that have rented their cottages out to people cooking crystal meth. That's a local one. And other ones where they've rented out with Kijiji, found a place, showed up, and they said, we're here for a rental. And it's like, who are you? Because somebody spoofed. And it's happened to me with my listings a couple times, where they've taken the photos, because Kijiji, anything goes, doesn't matter. There's no verifying the information, and they're trying to take it off as, rent my house because I'm a doctor and I'm in California, so $1,200 a month. Send money via Western Union, and it's just like, it happens, and we've seen it personally happen, absolutely, to our clients.
Yes, we did too. Every year at least, we had one or two people come to us and say, my dream vacation has just been shattered because the place I rented doesn't exist. Can you help me find something? And it was just heartbreaking because people were losing lots of money. So it was that big thing: never rent anything from Kijiji.
No, don't buy anything for nothing. It's a hellhole of scammers, and it's just we avoid it. We don't advertise on it, nothing. It's terrible.
And that's the other benefit of going through an agency, of course. Because every reputable agency, and I'll just add that every agency in Ontario has to be registered with the Travel Industry Council of Ontario. So you're looking for that TICO registration. But every agency inspects the properties that they list and advertise. So if you are going to rent through a TICO registered agency, then you can be guaranteed that that property is going to exist. And I think that's a big plus.
Absolutely. It's just, you can't be too careful anymore. There's always scams out there. I get text calls all the time of things, and it's just, and we get fake people trying to buy property. We get the odd text messages, and it's fairly obvious after looking at it for a minute or so that it's a fake, but they're everywhere, so you can't be too careful. Any other tips that you can give to people that are looking to get into the cottage rental as a sideline, not as a main employment, but if they want to rent the cottage out for 2 or 3 weeks a year?
I'll go back to what I said earlier on. The moment you exchange money for accommodation, you've become a provider to the travel industry. So in essence, you have gone into a small business, even if you're only doing it for a couple of weeks, and you've got to treat it like that. But things have changed, 20 years, just phenomenally. I remember when I first started out, and standard was leave as found. So you expected your guests to clean the place and clean the toilets and bathrooms and everything before they left, and that's gone. It really is. And I know there are still a few places where leave as found is still a mantra, but for the majority of professional properties, a cleaning service is expected. I would say high standards in everything. I was saying way back in 2000, I said, get rid of grandma's old throws and the old mattresses and anything that squeaks. Modern day guests have super high expectations because they've been all over the world and they have rented in different parts of the world. 20 years ago, people didn't have that experience. that wide experience of the short-term rental business or vacation rental business. Now they do, because they've rented in many places and they've got, they've got benchmarks. And I would simply say that a cottage to a guest has to be of the same or better quality than they would expect at home. So that really is setting the bar high. So it's high standards in everything, end-to-end hospitality, going the extra mile for a guest, making sure their needs are met from enough outdoor seating. But just simple. If your property accommodates 8 indoors, make sure the seating for 8 indoors and the seating for 8 outdoors. That's simple. Comfortable beds, and the number one criteria is the best Wi-Fi possible.
Yeah, and I was talking to somebody out in a previous episode with that. That's difficult. Like, people don't realize how difficult it is in cottage country to get good Wi-Fi.
It's changing though, isn't it? I mean, I'm here in my RV, in my recreational vehicle down in Alabama, with Starlink RV on the top of the rig. And I know there's a couple of owners that we had in Ontario that they couldn't get any local Wi-Fi of any anything that was good, and they went the Starlink RV route.
I know a lot of people were, I don't know recently, but a lot of people were on a waiting list for a year to 18 months to get it. What we've been telling people is, if you've got possibility to get in your area, and they only allocate certain areas a certain amount of people, so they don't overload the service, from what I understand. So if you get on the waiting list, find something in the interim. There's the Bell Rural Internet. Rogers has a similar type. There are bandwidth caps with it, but get something. Don't be tethering your phone. You will go through data like crazy,
and that's
especially if you're renting it. Yeah,
and guests do not want to use their own data.
Nope.
And
guests.
And there's plenty of supply out there with owners who have seen the requirement for the best Wi-Fi possible, and they've gone that extra mile and got it, and they're going to get the bookings.
So those are great things to talk about, but I want to know a little bit, now that you've sold, what's kind of on the docket for Heather Bayer going forward? You're still going to continue blogging about the subject and speaking, I'm assuming?
Yeah, exactly. I've moved from being operational in the business to full-time educator in the business. So when I started 20 years ago, when I came over from England, I bought my first property. I knew nobody. I couldn't get any information from anybody, because everybody seemed to think that it was all very secretive, and they didn't want to share those secrets with me. Things are very, very different now. It's easy to go out and get information. But having said that, it's all very fragmented. You can go onto YouTube and pick up a few tips here and there. But what we're doing with Vacation Rental Formula is building a masterclass network for anybody who wants to get into this business and to do it really, really well. We're going to train you to do it, and we are building a comprehensive library of different courses. So for somebody who wants to start a property management company, there are courses for them, and for independent hosts who want to do it right and who want to learn about operational aspects of it, building a website, content marketing, using ChatGPT. So we're teaching all of that. And our mission is to train the responsible and professional rental hosts and managers.
Where can people find that online?
They can find us at vacationrentalformula.com. Our site is in the process of being revamped and rebranded. But you will find it, because we're going to be calling ourselves the Vacation Rental Formula Business School, and that's going to be launched in May. But for now, you can go to vacationrentalformula.com. You'll find my podcast on there. I've been podcasting since 2014. There's upwards of 485 episodes on there. But I have to say they've been downloaded 1.3 million times. I'm very proud of that.
Oh, that's insane. That's fantastic. Wow. Well, it's just, it's the way that we get information. This is the reason I started this thing out. And you've got these ideas for years and years, and your ideas ahead sometimes of the technology that's available. And now the technology it's available for everybody, and it's free. It just takes a bit of a time commitment to kind of plan it out. But we'll put the link to your website in the show notes, so if you want to visit the site. And again, this is the most knowledgeable person that I know on the planet when it comes to the subject. We've known each other for 25 years or whatever, and probably want to have you back at some point in the future. I want to kind of maybe bring you back at some point when some of the short-term stuff in this area kind of settles down a little bit. I think there's going to be a lot of changes over the next couple of years. I know Magneto One's redoing their rules over there, and they've certainly got it. They're certainly going to be dealing with it there. Archipelago, I don't think is doing anything at this point. McKellar, depending on the week, they kind of vacillate back and forth. There's lots of short-term rentals in McKellar. They don't seem to be a problem for the most part. And a lot of them are long-term people that are renting or using agencies. That doesn't seem to be a problem, but that will probably change. And then you're going to be on the road sometime in the next few weeks, heading back up to the Great White North.
Yes. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, actually. I've been down here in Gulf Shores, Alabama since the end of October.
Oh, wow.
I've had the whole winter down here in the South. Not that we haven't had some freezing weather. I have to say, it always shocks me when when they come around and knock on the door and say the pipes are going to freeze tonight unless you switch your water off.
Wow. Well, it'll be nice to get you back here and that. Thank you very much for coming on, and we hope to get you on again soon. Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye.